Gerunds, what are they? First of all, a gerund is a verbal, and a verbal is very closely related to a verb. The difference between a verb and a verbal is that a verb has a subject, while verbals will never have a subject. So that's the important distinction to keep in mind, because verbals and verbs look very much alike. They both imply some kind of action: hitting, studying, sleeping, running, preaching. Those are all actions, and those words can be either verbs or verbals. In English, we talk about three kinds of verbals: participles, gerunds, and infinitives. And a key thing to note here in recognition of these verbals is the ing form. Most gerunds and participles will end in ing. It's not a sure thing. It doesn't always take place. But by and large, participles and gerunds, especially gerunds, end in ing. And then infinitives are very easy to recognize because they're always the preposition to with a verb. To run, to hit, to read, etc. Now be careful, because if you have the preposition to with a noun, you have a prepositional phrase. But when you have a preposition to with a verb, as you have here, then you have an infinitive. At any rate, participles, gerunds, infinitives are the three verbals in English grammar. So what is a verbal noun? Well, a verbal noun is a verbal that's functioning as a noun. We call those gerunds in English grammar. And of course, if something is a substantive or functioning as a noun, then we will expect it to be either a subject, an object, or a predicate nominative, one of the noun functions. That's what it means to be a substantive. And a gerund is a substantive. It's a verbal noun. It's a verbal that's functioning as a noun. Now that's important because participles are verbal adjectives, verbals that function as an adjective, which means that we will expect a participle to answer one of these questions. Which one? What kind? How many? And a participle always modifies some noun. While in contrast to that, a gerund is a noun. It's functioning as a noun or a substantive. So if we look at some examples here, here's Solomon, and you'll notice that Solomon is a noun governing this verb right here. Solomon, subject, had finished the verb. Now if I ask myself, Solomon had finished what? Then I realize that building the house of the Lord is the gerund phrase. It's called a gerund phrase because it begins with a gerund. And since an object, in this case a direct object of this verb, is a noun function, we then know that building is a gerund, because gerunds are verbal nouns, they function as nouns, and building here is functioning as the object of this verb, and since that's a noun function, building is a gerund. Another example: be careful to keep all this commandment which I command you today by loving the Lord your God and by, and the verse goes on, but just note here, loving the Lord. Loving, you say, well, is that a participle or is that a gerund? Well, if you look at this word right here, you see that by is a preposition. Every preposition must have an object. So if I say by what? By loving. So loving here is a gerund that's functioning as the object of the preposition by. And of course, we know that gerunds and participles usually are parts of a larger phrase. And here it's loving the Lord your God. That is the gerund phrase, loving the Lord your God, called a gerund phrase because it begins with a gerund. And in this case, the gerund phrase is the object of the preposition by. Since object is a noun function, we know that loving is a gerund and not a participle.